Hi, I'm Tom Luna. I'm a former school board member. I was privileged to serve as senior advisor to U.S. Secretary of Education Rod Page. I also had the honor of serving for 8 years as Idaho State Superintendent of Public Instruction. During that time, I also served as president of the Council of Chief State School Officers. One thing I have learned in all these experiences is that educating children is not rocket science, it's more complicated. On my podcast, Swimming Upstream, we will visit with courageous leaders who challenge the prevailing tide and inspire all of us to swim against the current. Let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of Swimming Upstream with Tom Luna. I'm your host, and we're visiting with another leader in education, state leader in education, Secretary of Education, Aimee Guidera from Virginia. And Aimee, we're here at Excellence in Ed, and there are education leaders, thousands from across the country that are here. We're going to hear them when they break sessions. It'll get a little noisy in here. But just a real opportunity to kind of rub shoulders and learn from each other. And we're taking an opportunity with our podcast, Swimming Upstream, to talk to some of those education leaders that not only now, but for most of their career, have been swimming upstream, kind of pushing against the current, pushing against the status quo. And so we're so pleased to have you here, Aimee Guidera, on Swimming Upstream. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And it is so great to be back at JebFest. I was just saying to somebody, this is either like a spa day to be here or also like a booster shot that I feel like just being in this group where I'm inspired, I'm hopeful, and I feel more empowered to go home and do the right thing after being surrounded by all these leaders. So it's awesome. So.
When I was in office, same thing. I would leave this event and I would go home energized, convinced that it can be done, and always with a couple ideas and stuff that I hadn't considered, and maybe something I had considered, but I couldn't figure out how to get around the barriers or roadblocks. And so it's always been very, very helpful. So this is the 14th year.
It's incredible. And I think I've been to almost all but the first one. And I do not miss this because it's such a great, just energizing couple days. So I'm so glad to see you and glad to be here. Yeah.
So you're the Secretary of Education in Virginia and recently appointed by your new governor.
Yes.
And so let's talk real quick about your background that leads you up to this, because our paths have crossed before. What I know about your work, Aimee, is the work that you've done when it comes to quality data in education. So talk about the importance of that, and then we're going to shift and talk about how that background and that knowledge is shaping some of the decisions and paths that you and the governor are pursuing in Virginia.
So, my first job when I came back from Japan, I was teaching in Japan, was at the National Governors Association. And it was in those first 3.5 years in my career that I knew that I wanted to work in education policy at the state level and that I wanted to work for governors because governors can get things done and change the world. And it took me 35 years, but I am now working for an unbelievable governor and we're trying to get things done. And I would argue that all of the things I've done in the 35 years that took me to finally get to my dream job have prepared me for this moment. And everything from working at NGA to working with the National Alliance of Business, helping business leaders and really understanding the importance of making sure that our education system and our workforce development systems are geared towards the labor market needs of our incredibly changing economy really matters. And then, of course, at the Data Quality Campaign, where we worked really hard to change the conversation and the culture around information and how do we make sure that data is used as a tool for continuous improvement and to manage for results. And that's what we're doing in Virginia is we're trying to change this culture and to use data as a truth serum to make sure that everybody knows that we are not serving all of our children well. And at the same time, using it as a way to identify how do we see every child, how do we make sure we are reaching every child, and how do we make sure we are providing the services and tools and education to ensure that every child is on track.
And how do you do that without data, right?
Cannot.
And some people were very surprised to learn that the using data for improvement to evaluate what's currently being done and find ways to adjust and improve is a rather new approach to education. It's not new to business. It's not, we wouldn't run our families that way.
but in education, and you've been a pioneer in that effort to help open up people's eyes to the value of that.
It's so true, Tom. When you think about it, there's not a single organization in the world that is getting results without using information as a flashlight and not just as a hammer, right?
Yeah,
How do
yeah,
you do that?
yeah.
I don't care if it's public, private, nonprofit. You have to use information to identify where you are and then what you're going to change to get results,
Yeah.
to get different results. And in education, we've used data for so long as a tool of compliance,
Right.
and not a tool.
Or like you said, like a hammer.
And
Right.
so there's a lot to do, and we have a lot, and that's what one of the upstream things we're trying to do in Virginia right now is have people understand, because one of the things in Virginia, and this is very much where I feel like I'm swimming upstream, is, Governor Youngkin was elected, and from the campaign trail, and then when we launched day one, to restore excellence and high expectations to education in Virginia. And the number one thing I've heard when I go testify in front of the General Assembly or when I'm out talking is that, how dare you? How dare you tell us that we don't have excellence in Virginia, that we're not great? Because for so long, Virginia has relied on using averages, and we have a lot of great schools and really things that are working, and those averages are skewing so that it looks like everything's
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah.
But when we have longitudinal data, we can see that we are not providing excellence and an excellent education and quality education to every one of our families for all. And that's what we do every morning, is wake up and say, we're going to make sure we see every child and that we expand opportunities for those children. And data like this. So we, in our state, we've been collecting information on early childhood data, and we had never released it to the public. And the data that we finally released this year says 42% of our second graders are not on track to read independently by third grade. And
Wow.
people in this conference know that's a death knell.
Yeah.
Right. That's
Yeah.
that's condemning a child to a life of diminished opportunity. And we weren't telling people.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what we're doing, is trying to create a
Transparency.
culture of transparency and accountability.
Yeah, because if you want parents engaged, they need information also, right? And to know that their child needs the extra help and assistance. You and I both know that if a child isn't reading at grade level by the end of third grade, our chances of being able to turn that around are minimal, right? And the impact that will have on a student's pursuit of prosperity or quality of life is going to be huge.
Absolutely. And, I used to say this at Data Quality Campaign that, if I took my daughter to the pediatrician and he had a piece of data that he didn't tell me about that was life-changing for her, that would be medical malpractice. And in some ways, that's what we've been doing in education, is that we have the data. We know which kids are not going to do well. And that's education malpractice, that we're not providing students themselves. Teachers oftentimes aren't getting that information, but mostly they're not getting that information. And then parents, most importantly, we are not being honest with parents about where their children are. And that's another thing in Virginia we're doing, is what we are putting parents and students first, and making sure that that parents, students, and teachers are working together to support student achievement. And that's one of the things I brought back from my year in Japan of teaching. So they have a beautiful saying in Japan that student success rests on a three-legged stool. And the three legs are the student, the teacher, and the parent. And if one of the legs is wobbly or not solid, the other two must even work harder together in partnership to support that end goal of making sure that every child is prepared for life. And that's what we're bringing in Virginia, is trying to think about how do we empower those three critical stakeholders with information, with an ability to talk to each other and to work productively together.
Wonderful. So a turning point in the governor's election, Governor Youngkin's election, at least the point where most of America started paying attention, really was a comment made during the election about the importance of parents. It really energized people in Virginia and caught the attention of the country, and really the governor rode that wave into election. So talk to us about some of the things that the governor and you are focusing on to once recognizing that that's so important for parents, and how they responded in the election to actually delivering and empowering parents.
Right. So several ways. So one, parents matter. And that is what we say every single day, is that parents matter. And for too long, and in the last several years, we have pushed parents out of our schools. We've pushed them out of decision. We haven't been providing them the information they need. And so we've done some really, I think, revolutionary things that shouldn't be revolutionary, right? When I grew up in school, my parents were in my school all the time. My teachers came over for coffee after school with my mom. She was the PTA president. Like, there was just a community partnership. And we had retired senior citizens in our class classrooms doing tutoring with us, right? We had the community in the school and the school in the community. And so we're trying to also revive that in Virginia. But there's some really basic things we did. One, back in January, February, we said parents matter in our Constitution. We have a law that says parents are the primary decision maker and will be involved in making decisions. So we said that parents could opt out of wearing masks. So we just reinstituted and reinforced that parents will make decisions about children. And we reinforced that with decisions about sexually explicit materials, and that parents have a right to knowing if their child's going to be exposed to something that they're not comfortable with. Likewise, we just issued our model policy that's still in draft format around transgender model policy. And the message there is that parents must be involved in making decisions about their child, making one of the biggest decisions in their lives. And so reaffirming. So on those pieces, we've just continued to reaffirm the critical role that parents matter and they must be part of their child's life and decisions. And we're also focusing on the fact that parents haven't had access to the information that they deserve about how their children are doing in school. So one of the things I'm really excited about is that we've launched an effort called Bridging the Gap. And one of the things we're trying to do is to ensure that parents, students, and teachers annually receive a snapshot of where their child is. So it takes all the tests and information that's been gathered on a child and presents it into a single, easy-to-use picture at a moment of time is, where is Aimee? How is Aimee doing?
Yeah.
And it's being provided at the same time, the student, teacher, and parent, so we can have a common picture and then have a conversation in our teacher, student, parent conference. And then we're developing as part of that a personalized learning plan so that if a child isn't where he or she needs to be, so what are we going to do to make up for the 2 years of learning loss that our kids in Richmond have experienced?
Yeah.
So that there's not the sense of hopelessness, but saying, here's the data, let's get a sense of where this child is, and then what are we going to do?
And the parents are part of that plan.
Part of it. And
yes.
no surprises. Nobody says, I didn't know about this, that my child wasn't on track. And so it's about building this partnership and building it using quality, actionable information, and then personalized, evidence-based lesson plans to go forward so that everyone's working towards the same goal. So that's really what we're trying. So we've put together an office of parent engagement and empowerment that's talking about how do we do more training for our teachers so they know how to work with parents, how to communicate with them, and how to use data in a way that's a tool for improvement and partnership.
Wonderful. So let's talk also a bit about, as you're engaging in this important work, the other challenges that not only Virginia but the whole country is facing. Teacher shortage is a huge issue. We've seen this coming for 10 years, right? The data has told us for 10 years, just because of the aging population, that we were going to have a teacher shortage issue, and we needed to come up with strategies to deal with that. The pandemic definitely amplified that, and I kind of expanded it. And then also recently the NAEP scores, right, have demonstrated that this abrupt disruption in education has had a huge impact on the gains that we've made over the past 30 years. Now, I think there can be an argument to be made that, is that all we really gained in 30 years, right? But that's another conversation. So going forward, when you, with all these bold efforts to improve education, talk to us about the other, dealing with those other challenges, teacher shortage and accelerated learning at the same time.
So let me start with the NAEP pieces. I mean, NAEP was devastating, and it's truth sharing, right? The nation's report card matters so much because it provides a national view of how states are doing. And in Virginia, it's heart-wrenching about what those scores tell us. We were looking at all of our data, but what NAEP reinforced for us is that our declines are faster than any others in the nation. So our fourth graders in math and reading had the largest declines across the nation, and our learning loss was 3 times bigger than the national average.
Wow.
It was already bad. It was horrific. And I would also want to say, for your listeners, this didn't just start with the pandemic. This is a trend that started in 2017 when Virginia policymakers lowered expectations, lowered cut scores, and basically set expectations for our children and for our adults at a lower level. And guess what? The system was designed and it got the results it was designed for. And so what we're focused on laser-like right now is how do we reset our expectations to be the highest in the nation? How do we go? And you look at the scores, Virginia's proficiency cut scores as benchmarked against NAEP is the lowest. So we are committed to raising our expectations so that we know that we're preparing our kids for life. We're going to change. We're going to be the most transparent and accountable system in this country. And we're also going to focus on what we know what works. So that means using data in a different way, as we were just talking about. But it's also about making sure that we are attracting, growing, and retaining the greatest teachers. Because as you know, having access to a quality teacher next to a parent's involvement in education is the most important indicator.
Yeah,
of success.
Robert Marzano, right? I'm a big fan of his work, and his research has shown over and over that once a child enters the school, the most important factor is the quality of the teacher.
And so part of this is about, I'm a conservative. How do you build marketplaces? And, information and dollars and good opportunities are the three things that you need to have a market work. And so part of this is that we're going to start in Virginia, making sure that we're paying teachers more who are serving the students who need it the most in communities, and making sure that teachers who are also going to work in the hardest to staff subjects, and also putting more dollars in to pay for results. And so we're going to move towards a pay for performance, and to say we need to recognize and reward quality, and quality is defined by making an impact on student achievement.
Yeah.
And that's going to take a couple of years to get, because our data system needs to be tweaked a little bit. So things that happened 15 years ago have not been happening. And so we're building a data system to be able to allow us to do that. But we have got to support our teachers. And the shortage is a crisis, right? How do we do more to make sure? So, we just put an additional $10 million in on teacher recruitment and retention, but that's on top of a $70 million we just did around our Virginia Literacy Act. And a huge part of that is about changing what happens in schools of education, about how we prepare our teachers,
prepare pre-service
coaches around literacy. And we're going to be doing the same thing around math, because as Nape just showed us, we have horrific, it's learning loss everywhere, and we just need to focus.
What about alternate paths to certification?
Yeah, so we're open to everything. And, National Board of Professional Teaching Standards, we are open to anything that ensures that we will get a quality teacher in every classroom in Virginia. Has to be what we focus on.
I've always struggled with I'm a huge supporter of alternate paths to teacher certification. I've always wished we didn't use the word alternate, because that alternate's usually what you settle for when you can't have what you really want. There should just be multiple pathways to this career, right?
Isn't that the story of education in America, though, right? Is that we do one size fits all for everything.
Yeah.
And we're Americans. We don't do one size fits all for anything except in education. So why do we have one way to go through high school, one way to get a teacher to listen? So this is a moment to blow things up and focus on how do we get results. Yeah. And we can't wait. And there's an urgency. And that's what Nape provides for us, is an urgency. So we should be trying everything.
That's right.
And focus on evidence.
That's right.
And then putting our dollars, which in Virginia, we have $2 billion sitting on the table in our school systems right now. Wow. How do we use that to focus on what we know works and try everything, including investing in teachers and different ways of getting them in the classroom?
Yeah. And, when you consider alternate paths into the teaching profession, all you're really doing at the state level by removing those barriers is you're not lowering the bar, right? You're just removing the barriers without lowering the bar. And you're really just increasing the applicant pool. The district and school still decide if they want to hire and who they want to hire, right?
And let's use data to hold them accountable, right?
Yeah.
This whole idea of using data to make sure, which has also been the third rail of education, is that we can actually use value add in terms as a kind of measure of success, which is crazy.
Yeah.
We know that it matters.
So a year from now, what two things. A year from now, what does this conversation between you and I, what are we talking about in Virginia? And then also, if I'm listening to this podcast and I'm intrigued and excited about some of the things I'm learning in Virginia, but I recognize that in my state, there's just pushback and obstacles. Talk about what advice you would give to other state leaders that are facing some of the same challenges, but also the same resistance to solving those challenges.
So to that last question, I'll say, quote my favorite Edward Deming's quote, which is, in God we trust, all others bring data. And I think that having the data in your back pocket says this is not a political statement. This is not one person's opinion. When you have the data to back up where you are and then what you want to do, it changes conversations. And this is really about change management, of how do we create urgency and a desire to change. And you've got to start by building an awareness for a need to change. And when you can provide data like we now have in Virginia and so many states have that show that we are not serving all kids, it changes the conversation and makes it really real. And so that's my case. This is again going back to using information as a flashlight to really build awareness about we are in crisis. We are on the cusp of almost losing a generation of children if we do not act differently. And to your first question, I hope when we're back here in a year, I hope that we are instituting a new accreditation and accountability system. I'm hoping that I can come here and tell you proudly that in Virginia, we're holding our children to the highest expectations in the country and that they're prepared for life. I'm hoping at this point that every parent, every student, and every teacher in the Commonwealth of Virginia has had access to a clear picture of where their child is and has an understanding of how they can work in partnership with teachers and parents to get to where they need to go. We cannot do this without working with parents and with teachers and supporting both of them and with students. And I also hope we're further along with having multiple pathways to success for everybody. One of the things that we're launching is our lab schools, which is another way of saying one size fits all is not working how we're delivering education. So I'm hoping we have at least 5 lab schools launched by next year too. So I look forward to coming back and talking about all those things.
And then Secretary Guidera, one more thing, a little bit different, but before we go, I've been asking all of our guests, share with us one thing about the Commonwealth of Virginia that is unique or interesting that most people don't know.
So not only do we have a 4-year term limit, which means every single minute counts, and we're working on Youngkin.
So your governor only serves one term. All right.
I think we're the only state
I think
that
so.
does that, and it means that we don't waste a single second. But we are also, I believe, the only state that refers to our governor as His Excellency.
Oh, His Excellency.
So yes. So
what does Mrs. Youngkin think of that?
I think his children laugh a whole lot, and I think Mrs. Youngkin also ribs him a lot of. So
that's a fascinating point that I was not aware of the how you refer to your governor. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Perfect. And Aimee Guidera, Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and so excited that you took time at this conference to share some of your thoughts with us and also to really share your thoughts with people that'll listen to this podcast, learn so much and be inspired by the great work that you're doing in Virginia. So share that with your governor and with your state superintendent and the other folks that are there doing the hard work, but the necessary work and swimming against the stream.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. And folks, we've had the opportunity to have Secretary of Education Aimee Guidera here on Swimming Upstream. And we look forward to future episodes where you'll hear from other state leaders and education leaders talking about their efforts to swim upstream and to swim against the current. Thanks.
Thank you for listening. And remember, our children may only be 22% of our population, but they represent 100% of our future. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. Swimming Upstream is part of the Strategos Podcast Network. To view the entire lineup of our shows, visit our website, strategosgroup.com.